let's talk about the parable of the sower. A sower went out to sow, and some of the grain fell on the path, but people stepped on it and the birds came to eat it. Some of the grain fell on rocky soil. Oh, it started and made roots, but then withered and dried up because of the sun. And the roots were not deep enough. Some of the grains fell onto weedy soil. And then that plant was suffocated. And some of those grains, some of those seeds fell on good soil, had deep roots, and then flowered and gave even more seeds. So this story can easily be translated spiritually. You know, what type of soil are you? Is God growing in your heart? Is your soil fertile enough? How is it? So, are the seeds just falling somewhere where it just can't take root? Or is your heart too hard, like rock, and good things can't take root there? Or are you just so full of all of kind of preoccupations and finally even good things can't thrive? Or finally, is it a good soil? And whatever word of God is coming to you, it can grow and thrive. So a wonderful spiritual meaning. And what is Jesus doing essentially? He's explaining how all plant life reproduces. That's how God created it. Plant life, it grows and can bear seed or develop a nice fruit. That one bears seed. And those seeds have different ways of dispersing themselves, but that's how it goes into the soil and then grows again. So what happens when we start playing God and modify the genetic code, the DNA? And one company has specialized in that, Monsanto, but there are other ones. And what's happening? It's very disgusting. So people in a lab are now able to take the genes which can be interesting and insert them in the DNA of other living things, and so they're genetically modified organisms. They're still part of the same species. One gene has been changed. And in case of Monsanto, typically it's that gene that's able to resist to Roundup, to a type of pesticide, herbicide. Yeah. And so there's also other genes that can try to do other things. But what I find disgusting is that these companies who develop this then say, oh, just like any other invention, we worked hard to develop this invention, which is a living being, which is a seed, a plant. But, we worked hard to do that. So now we are owners of this. And so only those who pay us to get these seeds may plant it on their field. And then what happens? Well, some of the seeds wound up in another field. And I mean, that's kind of easy because, some of the animals can pass and it goes, let's say, on their fur, on their feathers, or even in their mouth, goes through their system, and those seeds go and are pooped somewhere else in someone else's field. And this happened in South America, that someone who did not plant GMO seeds, had plants that were growing there. And then Monsanto decided to sue that person for having them. For me, that's the greatest indication that they think they're a god and that they can create some types of life and want to have control over it. And as if this is not appalling enough, there's even worse, because there's the invention of terminator seeds. So the seed is put into the soil and then grows into a plant that then produces seeds, but those seeds are sterile. So you can try to get those seeds and then it won't give life. So in the genetic makeup of that plant and those seeds and the pollen related to that, if that pollen is blown from those plants that have terminator seeds, well then that is blown somewhere else. Let's say we're talking about wheat, or we could talk about corn, or we could talk about some other one. But that is blown somewhere else and could go to another native plant, so from corn to corn or wheat to wheat. And then one of those seeds could actually bear that genetically modified gene and then be passed on, and then we would have a type of illness where 1 out of 2 times, or depending on the stats, but very often those seeds will not be able to produce. It's extremely dangerous. We're crossing a line here that for me is unacceptable. And David Suzuki, for example, who studied as a geneticist, well, is the first one to be extremely disturbed by the genetic technology and what we're doing with it. And we're just doing it from a greed point of view, and this can really have an insidious impact on the environment. This should just be totally eliminated. It's not ethical. In the Gospel according to John, Jesus refers to himself as the true vine. And I love this description. So, Christ is the vine itself, that you can imagine has very divine sap. And the way lots of fruit trees work is that you can actually graft yourself upon a tree. So all of these branches can be grafted. You as an individual can be grafted onto Christ through baptism, through conversion. And then you benefit from that constant contact with Christ, and it changes your life, and you become more fruitful. I am the true vine, and my Father is the wine grower. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit. Well, it's always funny to hear this way of talking, that those who abide in me and I in them, but that's everything about grafting. At a certain point, when you leave that graft for many years, you can't really distinguish what is the original part of the plant. You might see a little something, but otherwise, it's part of the whole. But as much as I love this description, I feel like getting into the scientific process of, grafting, and mostly how the sap circulates. And then maybe this explanation that Christ is pointing us to might actually open our eyes on something even bigger. So here we go. When it rains, the water in the soil dissolves a certain amount of nutrients that then get into the tiny roots and then the bigger roots, and that goes up the plant. It's called the raw sap. It's that red line with the arrows that you see flowing up. Have you ever wondered why it goes up? It's something called evapotranspiration. And so there's water at the surface of the leaves, and then they evaporate, which creates a vacuum and sucks it in. So it's that suction, that vacuum, that makes the sap from the roots go up. Really amazing. Okay, so the raw sap comes from the roots and then goes up. And then it goes up and finally gets to any one of the branches and goes to one of the leaves. In the leaf, there's a process called photosynthesis, and that is because there are little holes in the leaf where the air goes through. The air goes through, and so there's CO2 present there, and thanks to the light rays, it gives energy to the chlorophyll to be able to fix the CO2 and then break it apart, send O2, oxygen, back out, keep that carbon atom, collect 6 of them, and make sugar out of them. That cycle of 6 carbons make up sugar, and that's a reserve of energy for things later on. And that sugar, those 6 carbons, are then thrown into another way to circulate the sap called the elaborated sap. So that's the blue line there with the arrows. And that will then go down, and it can go in other places, preferably to the fruit. Most fruit are sweet, so all of that makes sense. So there you go. The raw sap goes through the leaf, elaborated sap. So when Jesus says that I am the vine, you are the branches, and so we are grafted upon Christ, and He gets us that spiritual, divine, raw sap that then comes into our branch and to our leaves. And here's what I'd like to emphasize, which is not part of His parable, is that when it gets to our leaves have to be open to the environment, open to the sun, and open to the air, to be able to be in contact and to change that sap, have a process of photosynthesis, change that sap, and then that's what will be able to go to the fruit we're going to produce. If we're grafted onto Christ, but then the sap comes in, but we close our leaves, we're only turned towards Christ, but not towards our environment. Well, then we don't see injustice. We don't see the people suffering, the sick and the poor. We don't see environmental destruction. Our leaves are closed, so we don't produce any elaborated sap, and we don't produce fruit. So I love the fact that Jesus says that He's the true vine. I love the fact that we are branches, this idea that we're grafted, that we get His divine sap, but to be able to produce fruit, I'm adding the fact that our leaves have to be open. And this sums it up. There are 2 conditions to bear fruit. First, the branch must abide in the vine, and second, the leaves must be open to their environment, the sun, the air, the injustices, and then we bear the fruit that Christ really wants us to produce. Have you ever heard the story of the Good Samaritan? Well, here's a new version. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Here's a story of an ecosystem that was robbed, stripped, beat, and the culprits just went away. The earth is that victim. But a Samaritan, so first some legal person, some person high up in society sees them and, oh, I'm too busy, I can't. And then a priest passes and says, oh no, it'll affect my purity, so I won't come close. But a Samaritan, which for someone walking in Judea would be an outsider and not someone very much appreciated, but a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, the victim, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity, compassion. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And the story goes on to say that he tells the innkeeper, here's some money to take care of him. So not just to rent the room, but even money to take care of him. And he says, in a few more days, I'll come back and we'll see how he's going, and we'll continue caring for him. So you see the priest in the background just going off to the temple. You see some other high elite in the society, but it's the Samaritan who's taking care of that poor man. So the earth is suffering a lot. And what do? Do we want to take care of the earth or some ecosystems as a victim? What are you going to do when you see environmental destruction not too far from where you are? Are you going to go on your way, or shall you help? Are you going to take time and take money to help? Can you do an action that will last a few days? And are you willing to do this at the risk of being marginalized, just like the Samaritan who's an outsider? Okay? Politicians haven't talked a lot about environment, and even today have trouble talking about the environment sometimes because it's not good for their reputation. Bankers, oh my goodness, they're always looking at the profits and not always ethically where these investments go. Lawyers, religious purity. We didn't want to touch something about the environment because it was related to paganism, or it's dirty and it's political, so I don't want to touch that. So the Good Samaritan can enlighten us on how we want to help what's injured, not just only a person on the side of the road, but even ecosystems and creatures around us.